figure the format of what we'll do today, Sam, if that's okay, is we'll go through like some history of Sam Gage. We'll get some info on you for the lovely folks at home. We'll maybe talk like some general game stuff, and then maybe we'll have a look more specifically at programming bits. Does that sound all right?
Yep, sounds perfect.
Beautiful stuff. Beautiful stuff. Um, okay, it looks like we're hitting around the number I was expecting in terms of the fast trackers, folks. So hopefully we've got a lot of them in. Oh, that's the other thing is we're going to be taking questions from the audience. I've got two lovely folks with me, Katie and Jaden, who are going to be just feeding those questions across to me. Guys, if you send those to me in the like a Discord DM, that way I don't need to be clicking about. That would be fantastic. Thank you. So why don't we kick off, Sam? Why don't you introduce yourself real quick? What's the headline news for Sam?
Sure. So, well, I suppose the headline news at the moment, I'm running a small VR indie company. We're just getting ourselves off of the ground. I've just spent the previous decade working exclusively in VR, I think, at various companies. So I can give you a kind of a run from the start rather than a kind of slightly backwards hodgepodge approach to it if you want. But
Yeah, please do. How did you get started? What kicked you off in your career?
sure. So my first job, actual proper job, making video games was at Climax, and that was working on the game Silent Hill: Shattered Memories. So that was that was for the PS2, the PSP, and the Wii, which was kind of obviously a survival horror game, but it used a lot of motion controls on the Wii in quite interesting ways. And the way I got into that was when I was at university. I was working on a project which was trying to recreate the feeling of being in a dream, but in first person. And I got very lucky that Portal was released in the year that I graduated. So I was able to take advantage of the sort of features of Portal in the engine and use that to make these kind of crazy non-Euclidean houses and all these weird spaces that would sort of change when you weren't looking and all this kind of thing. And that sent that off to a whole load of companies. I think probably about 30 different companies, and it happened that it was exactly what they were looking for that.
That's awesome.
It was absolutely lucked out on that one. So after that, I worked at Climax for about nearly 5 years, and one of the projects that I got working on was iPet and Friends, which is an augmented reality kind of pet game where you have like this half monkey, half cat thing, and you're playing with it on your TV, and you can brush its hair, and you can play with toys, and you can kind of draw toys in the air, and they turn into things like cars and diggers and all sorts of things. Really fun game. Really enjoyed kind of making a game for little kids because it was, kind of very different to the previous stuff I'd done on Silent Hill. And through that, I got to know the people at PlayStation because the project was for them. And the next thing they were working on was the Wonder Book, which was kind of an interactive pop-up storybook type thing, using a lot of the same tech that iPad used. And so I went to PlayStation and I started working on that. And after a few months, they cancelled our project. And we were all very sad for about a week until they told us we were going to be working on virtual reality. And that was kind of how I first got into that. So again, it was kind of just being in the right place at the right time. Immediately jumped on that, got super excited about it. Spent probably nearly 2.5 years doing R&D, which resulted in PlayStation VR Worlds. So once I'd done that, I moved into the film industry for a bit because they were kind of ramping up a lot of their real-time stuff. So that was primarily to help them kind of work out how they could use virtual reality. We released a couple of little experiences, and also a lot of real-time virtual production stuff. So that was a lot of fun, just kind of seeing what opportunities games tech had in other industries. So I kind of leapfrogged straight from that to healthcare. So I started a small.
Oh, brilliant!
I started a small studio using Unity to make a VR experience which would help people get over their fear of heights.
Oh, wow!
exposure therapy,
Yeah.
and also an experience to help people who'd not been outside because of various problems. A lot of the time, it's like people who have like severe, debilitating conditions. They struggle to rehabilitate into society, and it's kind of like a practice. Walk into a cafe, get comfortable with your surroundings, that kind of thing. So that was fun
Mhm.
again, kind of using games tech in an unusual way. But after a while of doing that, I was a little bit. I suppose I just got an itch to get back into games, so I jumped back and I joined In Dreams, and we made Fracked. That was a lot of fun. That was using kind of a lot of the research I'd done into kind of moving people about in VR comfortably, and also the hands-on interaction.
Mm.
Um, and so I was there for a while. Yeah, got that game out the door, and then I kind of, I got to the point where a few friends, some of the people I worked with at previous companies, we got talking, and yeah, we decided to go out on a limb and start our own thing. So at the moment, I'm working part time for a company that does virtual event software, and also, like I said, trying to get this business off the ground. So.
And I want to come back and touch on a couple of bits you've mentioned there, but just so that folks can go and have a look at your current company. What's the name of your new studio that you're working on?
So that's Engage Software. I think the tweet you put out tagged it in, so people
Yeah.
can find
So,
us there.
folks, if you want to go have a look at some of the stuff that's going on there, that would be amazing. Maybe you've got some questions that Sam will be able to answer more specifically. I just want to touch on a couple of bits. You mentioned obviously working in film and working in healthcare and
Mhm.
starting one project and being taken off it and then finding another project that comes out of that flexibility in this industry. I just wonder if you can touch on that for a second and how important that skill is. It's all well and good, and we'll touch on programming and more hard skills a wee bit later. But those kinds of skills, being able to be flexible, being able to be adaptable, how far up the list of importance do you put things like that?
Well, it's definitely important to be able to bounce. The industry being as it is, and kind of often when you're making video games, you start out with the best intentions of the world, but sometimes a game turns out to be, too hard to make. There's some technical problem. Maybe even your publisher doesn't get a loan through, like there's an economic crash. I know in 2010, we had the repercussions of the 2008 crash come through because we basically finished all the projects we had at Climax, and then they didn't get any more in because no one had any money. And
Yeah.
it took like a year for people to get the money back, so they kind of had to let go almost everybody. I was out of work for 8 months, and then I just joined straight back up when I was, when the projects came back in. But occasionally that can happen. Big or small companies think things can go wrong, and you can end up sometimes if a project you're on gets canned, you can lose a year's work, 2 years work. It can be quite devastating for
Yeah.
some people, but I think it's important to understand that will happen sometimes, and
Yeah.
it's really difficult to try and pick a studio where that's not going to happen because yeah, you never know. So yeah, I think you have to just bear that in mind. And what I find is I suppose like a thing that I do to alleviate that is if a project I'm on gets cancelled, and I've had quite a few, I like to just make sure I take away what I've learned on that project, because you can always apply
Mm.
things to future projects. That there's always transferable things that you figured out, and if you're programming, at least you got some practice. So uh, yeah,
Yeah, I suppose as well, try not to take that too personally as well when something like that happens, but still being able to
yeah.
to reflect on the personal experience. That must be quite a hard dichotomy to sort of reconcile in your head and keep those two things separate.
Yeah, I mean, I can't pretend it doesn't hurt to have work thrown away, but like I said, it's one of those things when you're working in a creative industry. I suppose it maybe happens slightly less if you're making things like when I was working in healthcare, they had
Yeah.
very, very specific requirements because it was psychotherapy. We were working to a specification laid down by professional kind of like these sort of research academics. This stuff has been used in the real world for a long time, so we were kind of recreating something which we knew exactly what it was supposed to be.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're making a game, a lot of it is exploratory, and you might have an idea that sounds fantastic on paper, but you kind of get into it, you put months of work into it, and you realize actually this just isn't going anywhere, and you drop it and you try something else, and you take what you can from the project that you had. But I think it's just a hazard of working in the creative industries. I'm sure I've seen similar things happen in film. I'm sure similar things happen in music. It's
Mm.
um,
Is that exacerbated at all by the fact that you're working with, I suppose nowadays it's more common than ever before, but it's still perhaps considered less traditional. So whether that's working
hmm.
on the motion control with the Wii, like you were saying about early on, or working in VR now, is the idea of exploration and needing to throw away because do you know what, that's just not working. Is that
Mhm.
exacerbated at all, or is that just par for the course no matter what sort of hardware you're working with?
Well, I've kind of spent, I suppose I've spent my career kind of working on things which didn't exist a few years before, working on particularly like going the motion controls, then augmented reality stuff with the camera, and then virtual reality. Like it's always, I mean, particularly like when I was at PlayStation and started working on what was then Project Morpheus, we had absolutely no idea what we were doing at all. So it was really just throwing things at the wall. I must have made kind of about 60 prototypes of different attempts at making various games. Like, can we do a first person shooter? Can we do a racing game? Can we do like going through all the different types of things? Which was a lot of fun, and had kind of definitely got a lot out of doing that. And we kind of knew that was it's a thing of working at that studio at the time. It was kind of, you get to work on cool stuff,
Mm.
but it's experimental. It's R&D. You know that most of what you're doing is gathering information so that you can make better things in the future. It's a little
Yeah,
bit different if you're working on a game that's sort of been signed by a publisher and like the assumption is it's all going forward. But again, it's a lot of the time when you're working on things, you sometimes you have to take a drastic change in direction, which can mean that if you happen to unfortunately be the person whose work isn't included in the new direction,
yeah,
that can feel a bit personal that your work gets cut but other people's doesn't.
yeah,
Again, it's tough. But you kind of got to look at the bigger picture that you're in a large organization. If you're making an indie game, you'll find that you spend a lot of your own time doing stuff, and it's kind of easier. I find it easier to throw away my own work than have someone else throw away my work,
yeah, for sure.
because I've decided that work is bad,
Mm.
or not what we want to do. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, it's tough, but it will probably happen. So yeah.
For my own intellectual curiosity here, and again, we've obviously got an audience of people here who, if you've got questions, get them in the chat, and they'll be sent over, and we'll get those to Sam ASAP. But before we move on to sort of nuts and bolts questions for programming and
Mhm.
some portfolio stuff, just for my own intellectual curiosity, because you've mentioned VR, you've mentioned motion controls, and working on things that are very much on the cusp of cutting edge. A few years
Yeah.
prior that didn't exist. How do you look
Mhm.
at something that is that new and make that judgment of, yeah, this has legs? And I'm thinking, I suppose, because we see things nowadays, um,
Mhm.
things like, and I mean, like, I'll be honest, Sam, I was spying on your Twitter in prep for this, different bits like NFTs, different bits like metaverse and stuff that like the Facebook print screen that was released recently, where everyone and their neighbor looked at it and went, oh God, like what's going on there? And NFTs obviously extremely controversial as well. How can you be working in modern tech and maintain that wider view of, do you know what, that's going to work, or the opposite side of it, do you know what, I don't want to be involved in that, I don't think that's got legs?
I suppose. I mean, I suppose it depends what kind of cutting edge tech it is. Like virtual reality is we've been expecting it for a very long time, right? So there, people. I already had a very good idea in my head of what other people thought that virtual reality was going to be. It was a very clearly, like there was a lot of, I guess, material to draw on, and
Yeah.
also if you think about it, you're kind of recreating. well, virtual realities. So my reference was the real world, and then looking at the restrictions of the platform and saying, okay, what can we replicate from the real world in a virtual world, and how can we boost that and do things that you couldn't quite do in the real world but in the virtual world? So
Yeah.
I suppose it was like there was a lot of reference there. Now when it comes to something more like kind of metaverse, or NFTs, sometimes definitions aren't that well defined. There's a lot of conflicting kind of views on exactly what's meant by things. There's a hell of a lot of people just getting in and kind of using the fact that the technology is new as the kind of USP, where
Yeah.
actually there's not a lot of actual utility there. So it's something which I've not really looked into a lot myself beyond kind of keeping an eye on it, looking at
Yeah.
what's going on. But I don't think I would incorporate sort of NFTs into anything I'm doing, just because I don't see what it would bring to anything that I would want to make. There may
Yeah.
be things that other people are making that it does bring something useful to, but it just doesn't really kind of. It's just not a technology that I find that I would use for anything particularly useful. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that's such a key point as well, though, right? Like if the unique selling point is purely that it's new, that
Hmm.
maybe is a bit of a signifier, like quite an obvious signifier that, oh, maybe this thing doesn't actually have a lot to offer us right now. Um, it's just new and
Yeah.
shiny. Look at this new shiny thing over here.
Yeah, and there's a lot of kind of I mean, particularly when it comes to kind of the decentralization models and all this,
Yeah.
there's a whole lot of downsides if you're a developer, about kind of giving that control away, and it's
Yeah.
really to justify the added complexity of kind of doing that versus, it's great. It feels a little bit more kind of ideological than useful to decentralize
Yeah.
things in a way.
Yeah.
There's arguments that certain things should be decentralized, but when it comes to, like, you've got a video game and you've got items that you've got in that video game, it kind of seems a little bit pointless to decentralize the item database when the video game can be shut down by the developer. So
Yeah.
it's yeah. There's certainly, like I said, I'm sure there's some particular form of video game where it would make sense and that would be a great solution. But I think
Mm,
in terms of it being a widespread game changing technology, I think we've got quite a bit more work for people to do on just kind of figuring out what it can
yeah.
do that other existing technologies can't do. Because yeah, it's
Yeah.
that joke. Most of what you see, kind of claimed as is now amazingly possible because of the blockchain, is perfectly possible with a SQL database. So
Yeah, yeah, for
yeah.
sure. I guess in a broader sense, what I'm wondering and thinking about is, if we're looking at the fast tracker program, we're looking at up and coming, next generation people who are going to be the devs of tomorrow. How do they navigate new technology and new spaces? How easy is it to recognize those things? But I think you've answered that. Like you say, the USP, if that's just, hey, look, this thing is new, then rethink it. But I like what you're saying about the reference points as well for something like VR, where that technology, like you say, your reference point is reality itself. Then I suppose it needs to spark some sort of interest in the individual as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, like I was excited when that came out because it was allowing me to do a lot of stuff which I'd been waiting to do, and I think that's the same. Similarly, actually, with motion control. I mean, I played around with the Wii before that. I just sort of played games on there.
Mm.
But in terms of development, like my kind of experience before was just modding, first person shooter games and racing games. So I wasn't able to kind of do anything that was using an analog, kind of pointer input like that. So it was kind of fun to be able to go, oh, there's all this new stuff that I can do. It's kind of opened up a whole load of avenues in gameplay that I didn't have before. And I think for
Yeah,
me, that's again what excites me about virtual reality is that it allows me to make games that I couldn't have made previously. So
yeah,
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 that's
definitely.
stuff I'd like to work on. So
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, just taking a slight left turn, and thinking more specifically about programming, and again, obviously, we've got the a lot of our audience at the moment will be from the Fast Trackers program. Not all of you, I know that. So please get your questions into the live panel chat, and they'll be fed through to us. But thinking about programming stuff, just quickly, what sort of coding languages are you predominantly working with engaging with VR sort of bits?
Yeah. So all of our stuff is in Unreal, so it's using the kind of the C++ with Epic's like special decoration stuff. That's really, really great. I love using it. I did at the healthcare company, and in a couple of previous roles, I've used Unity. So obviously that's C Sharp. I mean, there's the difference I find. Obviously, when you're using C Sharp, you're kind of doing your scripting type work and your coding type work in the same language. Whereas in Unreal, there's more of an obvious split between what is your code, and then you write things which then in the editor you plug together with Blueprint. And I suppose I prefer that model, but I think it is totally a preference. I couldn't tell you that there's like a universal argument for why that model is better. It's just my personal preference.
Oh.
But yeah, so C++ now, but yeah, C Sharp. Other than that, I think if I've used anything else in the game. Oh, Lua scripting. I think that's the only other language I've actually shipped in a game. Obviously, that's your scripting. So
yeah, how did you find sort of transitioning between the different languages, and does your approach remain the same in terms of learning that sort of stuff and implementing it, or is it horses for courses? Do you know what, this is a lot more visual, and so I need to work in a different way?
Well, I mean, I ended up coming out a bit backwards. So I didn't train as a programmer initially. I kind of grudgingly became a programmer because I wanted things done, and so I was like, oh, I wonder. Yeah, particularly when you're doing stuff at home, I didn't have a code team there, so I kind of got more and more into. So initially I was using a lot of kind of scripting stuff using other people's code. So I would write a lot of specifications just as a technical designer.
Yeah.
And then kind of over time, I got into writing the odd bit of tools and then like updating something that someone had written or just modifying it or exposing a parameter here and there, and kind of worked my way up to kind of like now I'm writing full blown C++ kind of heavy systems. But it was kind of, I incrementally did it backwards. So I think that maybe is why Unreal appeals to me more, because I like writing tools for myself so that I can then use those to make the game with. So it's kind of, I kind of put the two different hats on, and I put my coder hat on, and I write what designer hat me needs to make the game with. So yeah, I find that sort of, I think maybe that's why the separation's good. So
yeah, no, for sure. And again, I like, if the answer is horses for courses, that's absolutely fine. But what is there any sort of general advice you would give to people when it comes to their approach for learning something like that? So you're saying you had obviously quite a unique journey through those things. Is there one or a couple of bits of advice that you found that you would give your younger self when it came to approaching those different bits and pieces, even if it's like more general things like having an open mind when it comes to those sorts of things, or anything like that?
I mean, it's good to look around, I suppose, like to try different things. So like, I mean, I started off, I suppose, my first coding was sort of ActionScript and JavaScript, and then I went in and used various engines like Renderware and the Wonder Engine and the London Studio Creator, and like all these kind of custom in-house engines or engines with weird idiosyncratic things that the companies had added in. So I suppose it's like from jumping from that to that to that, and kind of getting experience in all of those. You see what the pros and cons are of various approaches. If you've like the way that different node graph logic works, the way that kind of different systems interact with each other. Getting a broad view of that is I think has been really useful. And now if someone sort of sticks an engine in front of me, I can kind of get to grips with it quite quickly. So it's, yeah, I definitely recommend it. It's that thing I'd recommend anyone who's like really hardcore into Unity, just download Unreal and have a play about, and the other way around as well. Just so that you understand the different approaches of different engines. Because the worst thing you want to do is come across a fantastic job opportunity, but then realize, that's the wrong engine.
Yeah.
Because I think being flexible, and that's quite important if you want to be able to sort of get into whatever role you want. Because ultimately, it's all logic. There's pros and cons of various approaches, but yeah, I think. But plus, a lot of the time, I mean, for some of the bigger companies, you'll be using completely custom in-house engines that you wouldn't have had the chance to put your hands on before anyway. So, yeah, being able to pick up a new one is quite important.
Definitely. Perhaps your answer to this next question might be just a reiteration of what you've just said, but something we're asking everyone in the Fireside Chats is how can game programmers stand out in an interview or a CV or a portfolio?
Well, I mean, in terms of like being on the more junior side, one of the really important things is like when you get to a games company, they'll probably ask you to forget most of what you know and try to kind of instill some better practices in you, because the way that you work alone, and obviously this is going to depend on kind of how you learned to code, but the way that you work on your own is quite different to working within a team, because when you're working on your own, you're kind of setting your own problems. And if something's hard, you drop it and you do the things that you find fun. Whereas a lot of the time when you're working in a studio, you're working to someone else's specification. You're working within a team. There's going to be a house coding style. So you've got to kind of work in a way that's, I guess, more team oriented. So I suppose the big thing is showing that you're not if you can go in there with a fantastic tech demo, but if it's written in a way that nobody else would be able to understand your code, then that's not going to impress people as much as if you show that you're flexible, willing to learn, and you've got some good examples of code, but no games company is going to expect someone to come in from university actually and then just let them loose on the code base. There's always going to be a kind of ramp up period where they're going to make sure that you're kind of doing things in the way that they need.
Yeah, sure. So are there practical things that people can do to be demonstrating that, like game jams and that type of thing?
Yeah, game jams are great for that. Particularly if you can kind of explain, here was what I was asked for, here's what I delivered, here's how the person used it. Just showing your work in a context. Similarly, it doesn't necessarily have to be game jams, just kind of if there's either like group projects, or even if you're just doing something working with someone online, or I mean, even if you just, when you decide to do something, kind of sit down and write down what the specification is, and then kind of do the work and kind of be ready to explain yourself in terms of how you would write code for someone to solve a problem, as opposed to kind of just showing off, look at this amazing kind of tech demo.
Yeah, for sure. I guess in a way, like when we're talking about teamwork and we're talking about flexibilities, in a broader sense, we're kind of touching on soft skills here. For
Yeah.
such a tech heavy role, and I know you've already you've touched on it there, but in a day-to-day sense, how far do you find soft skills come into your job and the people around you as well, people with
Yeah.
whom you work?
Yeah, I mean, well, so my job, particularly when I was in very much in this sort of technical design role, that is a job where you're basically writing really, really detailed specifications for programmers, for artists, for animators, all different disciplines. And then everything that you've ordered has to come back and fit together. And it's often your job to then fit it together and kind of do a bit of the wiring up. So a lot of people's time is then reliant on me getting things done right. So there'd be a lot of negotiation between departments, because certain things, you can put more pressure on one side than the other, and kind of offload some of the work sometimes. But I think just generally, when you're like, one of the big things is when you're working with a creative as a from the technical side, often they'll ask you for things which are completely impossible, and like it's often tempting to kind of, they say something which to you can seem stupid if you were feeling particularly rude. But you've got to understand that obviously that's not their background, and that their background has brings a lot of things that absolutely fundamental for making a video game.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily their job to understand the technical limitations. So quite often what you end up doing from a technical role is explaining to the creatives, you can't quite have that, but here's the closest thing that you can have. So you've got to kind of understand what they're asking for and kind of try and tell them, like, here's the possible version that I think fits what you've asked for. And there'll be a lot of back and forth on that, a lot of negotiation, and things might take a long time. So you say, okay, are we happy to commit this much time to it, or do we need to do something cheaper and quicker and lower risk? So there will be a lot of negotiation. You won't just get kind of a nice, neat specification through that's definitely possible to code. It's a messy process.
Do you have any good examples off the top of your head? I'm really putting you on the spot here, but any them asking you to deliver the world for them?
So well, one of the things actually, it's slightly different, I suppose. But there's when I was working in the film industry, I was a particular director I was working with, and he was describing this VR experience that he had in mind, and he was saying the player does this, then the player does this, then the player does this, then the player does this, and I kind of said, well, what if the player doesn't do that? And because he was coming from the film side, he's thinking in linear medium terms. The idea of someone making a choice that ruins your plan, it just wasn't in his experience. So, and this is a person, who's directed Hollywood movies, like big important people. Like, I'm not saying the person doesn't know what they're doing, but he was coming into an area that he didn't have a lot of experience in. So it was up to us to explain to him what the differences were and work through those things. And in the end, we came to some solutions which did work. But I think I'm trying to think of a good.
You needed to send him to go and be a QA tester for 5 minutes or something. Get him to just see games being broken for ages.
Yeah, well, I think my advice to him, I said, imagine a garden. You're trying to get them to follow the path, and what we need to do is build the fences. And
that's nice. I like that. Amazing. We do have a question here from the chat, and again, folks, get your questions in, and Katie and Jaden will send them to me. We got a question here. Is there any particular pioneering areas that you're excited to see greater development in the games industry? I suppose obviously VR will be one. That's your bread and butter. But is there anything sort of around that, or if you want to talk about that any more detail, specifically what you're excited about coming up?
So it's probably I mean, obviously, immersive stuff. The tech is getting better. The nice thing is, obviously, now that it's been proven that you can make good, fun games for it. So a lot of larger companies are getting involved, which kind of encourages the people making the hardware to put more research and money into that. So I think it's snowballing quite well. I'm just looking forward to where that goes. There's a lot of really hard problems that I don't necessarily think that will solve for a very long time. But I think that stuff's going to get better. The screens are going to get better. The latency is going to get better. But I think one of the things that goes along with that and maybe touches on this whole metaverse thing is just as network infrastructure and high-speed internet gets better, it then becomes easier to make multiplayer games, because obviously you don't have to so much deal with what were the sort of very horrible traditional problems of sort of prediction and making sure that everybody's client agrees. If the lower the latency gets, the more you can shove across the network, the more complicated things you can do, and the less those problems crop up. So that's an area that's useful. And just generally, hardware gets better every year. I mean, I've worked on 4 different PlayStations, and I can tell you that it's an absolute different world every time we've upgraded a version. The PS2, it was like a joke compared to the PS3. And then when I was on PS4, I was like, what were we doing on PS3? and now
Yeah.
the PS5's come along. I'm like, how did we get that working on a PS4? It's like it's bizarre. But yeah,
Man, I
a
know a
lot of
lot of people who will not accept this PS2 slander, no matter what hardware or anything else. I've noticed it online, a real resurgence of nostalgia for PS2 lately.
yeah. I mean, it's a lovely bit of kit, but
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of corners you need to cut, a lot of smoke and mirrors.
No. I suppose the biggest bit of tech, what was it called? The PlayStation Eye, where you did washing windows on the PS2? I can't remember.
Yeah, yeah.
What was it called? Something like that. Yeah, that was probably the VR of its
The
day,
eye,
I guess. Or the
the
AR
eye
of its
toy.
day.
Yeah,
Yeah, the eye toy, that's it, of course.
yeah.
Oh dear.
Yeah, that was we made iPad and Friends with, but that was PS3. That was I don't think you'd have got that running on a PS2.
Was it PS3? Oh, I have different things
Yeah,
in my head.
yeah.
Man.
There was the oh god, I forget. I think it was PlayStation Eye on the PS2 and then iToy on the PS3. I forget though.
Okay. The one I'm remembering had when I'm cleaning windows, like that was playing and playing. You had to like scrub the screen, and there was like a Fruit Ninja type thing as
Yeah, it's
well.
batting
I
the
don't know.
guys off. And, yeah,
Yeah. I don't know. That's my childhood. It's me just slowly about to turn 30. So every conversation I have now is about my childhood. We've
the
got
funny
another
thing-
question.
yeah,
Say it
yeah. Sure.
again.
No, yeah, go ahead.
We've got another question. How's it been setting up your own studio, especially in regards to funding? Although, obviously, if you don't want to talk about finances, you do not have to.
Okay.
And then the second part of it, I noticed you have a partnership with Sony. Did you keep connections from your prior work with them? How far did that help?
Well, on the second point, it didn't help at all, which
Mm.
is a great thing. PlayStation had an initiative quite a few years back now where they really decided to work on the fact that it was quite hard for indies compared to larger companies to get their games onto the PlayStation, and they've done a hell of a lot of work through the PlayStation indie stuff to make that easier. So we just went through the exact same route everyone else would. I think, to be honest, it's quite a while ago since I worked at PlayStation. I'm not sure who I still know who works in that department, but yeah, just signed up through the usual routes, and that was quite straightforward.
Yeah.
What's the first part? Sorry.
The first part was how's
Oh,
it been
setting up.
setting up your own studio? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So in terms of funding, it's difficult. I'll give you
Yeah.
that. A lot of the time, it's you've really got to kind of spend a lot of your time kind of writing your presentations, getting your numbers together, doing everything right on that side. And I just like to make things. So a
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
what we're doing is very reliant on us showing off cool demos. But doing the figures is kind of less my bag.
Yeah.
We are actually looking potentially to work with someone else on kind of covering that side. But the big advantage that I had going into this was that my kind of co-founder on this, Noxie, he was the IT manager that I hired at Oxford VR when we did the medical stuff, and he set us up kind of a studio with all of its hardware and its infrastructure and everything. Completely compliant to medical grade regulations. Like it's like setting up a studio on hard mode. So we'd already been through that process. Obviously, that was spending someone else's money, and so we had the luxury of kind of figuring all that out. And well, actually, I don't think he made any mistakes, but
Mhm.
kind of learning all the things that we had to do in that. So when it came to do it for ourselves, it was pretty much, well, we'll just copy and paste exactly what we did for that. So that was great. So we have kind of version control. We've got all of our comms, everything like that. Kind of all our secure documents, all that sort of stuff. So we're kind of really set up properly. We're all kind of information compliant, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, that's like a big thing, which I think a lot of indies starting off might struggle with if they're not kind of pairing up with someone who's from that background, because it's not such an obvious person to get involved at the start.
Yeah.
But it's kind of it's made things an absolute breeze because we're kind of using professional grade sort of setup for the company.
Yeah, definitely.
I suppose one of the tricky things really has been finding other people to get involved, for two reasons. Obviously, we haven't got any money at the moment, so it's like you're quite often asking and begging and borrowing and asking a lot of favors. But also, it's like when you're starting out like this, you want to be finding people who are happy to kind of work on the same stuff as you, and everybody's bringing their own ideas in, and you're kind of a lot more reliant on people than you would be kind of a larger company. And there's, it's a lot more kind of important that as a team you can kind of cover the gaps, because there are, a lot more gaps. So I've been lucky. I've been lucky in so far as like there's my audio director and art director from previous roles. They happily joined in, and that's been an absolute fantastic. Another artist as well has been kind of getting did a lot of the initial work, and so I suppose finding the other people, because it's very, very difficult to obviously make a video game on your own. It can be done, but you're very limited in what you're doing, and the sort of stuff we're doing, especially virtual reality. The idea that I would kind of write all of the systems and design the game and build all of the worlds, that's it's just too much work, and I'm very aware that it's just too much work. So having kind of people and scaling your ambition to the people you have, that's again something that's like tricky sometimes, because you want to do something that's fantastic, but also you need to be realistic about what you can achieve. So again, we've kind of a few times we've kind of gone down a road and then just been like, actually, this is going to take 30 people a year to do this. Like, this isn't the game that we can make right now. We're going to have, maybe that's the third game we make, but the first game we make is going to have to be a lot kind of more straightforward and simple to make.
Well, do you mind if we talk about that game for a second? And obviously, I know it's in production at the moment, so if you can't talk about it too much, like that's absolutely fine. But do you want to just tell us about Chime? Is it called
yeah? So the Chime is basically, if you were to imagine the sort of the adventure and puzzle parts of games like Zelda and Tomb Raider. So it's kind of these large sort of temple scale puzzles, big moving walls, moving platforms, lots of like sort of interesting kind of combination puzzles, all that sort of stuff. Climbing around, riding down zip lines, a few of the adventure mechanics similar to the work I did on Fracked. And we've built on top of that this sort of musical element. So the puzzles generally are based on bringing these giant ancient musical machines back to life. So I don't know if you remember, kind of in the late 90s, there was like, I suppose it was possibly one of the first viral videos on the internet, Animusic, where you had the sort of playing, if anyone on the listening hasn't seen kind of Animusic and Pipe Dream and all that, it's it's a little bit dated now, but it's still good fun. So we'd all seen that, and we wondered whether we could do something similar in real time, and we got some great results, kind of reading MIDI in and powering animations with MIDI. Did a thing where like there was a cellist and a violinist playing based on MIDI files, and we've got some kind of good tech around that. So at the moment we're basically building that in. So we by the end of the when you've solved all the puzzles, the entire world is kind of this alive kind of giant organ machine that you're inside. So but again, it's like just playing around with this gameplay. We've tried a whole bunch of different things, and we're still kind of figuring out what's fun and how to make the best most satisfying use of playing with virtual musical machines.
I suppose hearing all of that, it sounds amazing. I'm really, really curious. Like, where does an idea like that start? Does it start with, hey, do you remember, this thing from the 90s? Does it start with, oh, well, what if it's, a bit like this game, a bit like this game? Does it start with a mechanic? Does it start with with an art idea, an audio idea? Like, where Where does something like
So,
that begin?
well, so initially, I knew that the first thing I'd need to do is to, like, for kind of anything that we wanted to do um, in virtual reality that involved, I guess, like walking around, climbing, interacting with things. Like, that was the kind of game that we wanted to make. We wanted to make something that was like an adventure type game.
Mm.
But we didn't, like, because I'd made, the previous game I'd worked on was Fracked. That was very, very heavy on the shooting. And I thought, well, I want to make something that's not another shooter because,
Yeah.
I like variety. I want to challenge myself a bit. And we just wanted to do something that was a bit different. So we
Mm.
thought, what can we do that's, um, that makes it stand out? So it's not just a simple puzzle game. And one of the first people that came on board was our audio director Tao, he's been sort of, he's writing a lot of music for us, and we were sort of playing around with things, and then it was like, hold on, why don't we take some of the MIDI files and kind of see if we can process the data and do something with it? And it was kind of really just the fact that he was making the music, so he had all the source files with all the MIDI tracks for all the music he was making, and we
Yeah.
were making an adventure game which kind of needed a bit of a USP. And so we thought, oh, why don't we kind of see what happens if we write a system where the whole world dances about to the music? And
Mm.
it sort of just worked from there.
Oh,
So
wicked.
again, it's trying stuff out and seeing what works.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I know for a fact, like I come from a theatre background, but any creative background, I know it will be the case for the audience. Always the first question on the lips is like, and it's almost the most cliche question ever, right? But like the where do you get your ideas? That's starting with like a blank page, isn't it? It's so tough sometimes to get the ball rolling. So it's a question I always ask, no matter how cliched it is. Like, how did you get the ball rolling on that? So no, that's
Yeah.
fascinating. We
Yeah.
do have another question. Oh, sorry, go on, Sam.
I was just going to say it's kind of it was very much I suppose we picked the game that uses the skills we have in the most effective
Mm.
manner. It's probably the way.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. There's another question. We've already touched on it a little bit, but I suppose it's worth sort of addressing directly in regards to your studio to engage software and like how you have in mind how you want to approach something like this. So this is the question: as a VR dev, would you like a centralized metaverse platform for VR users to interact with your games and apps? Do you have preparations in place to transition over to a global platform, or any new ideas to incorporate into it?
I'll be honest, as a developer, the idea of an interoperable metaverse and trying to fit my game into it sounds a bit like a nightmare. Like it's a lot of the high level, I guess, like pie in the sky stuff that I hear about the metaverse. It's like anyone who's ever actually made a video game knows that video games are not as tidy and kind of you well, I suppose, like, if you so some people say, oh, you can own an item and take it from one game to the other and all this, and it's just like that sounds like horror for balancing. The way your animation system works is going to be totally different. You're probably using a different game engine.
Yeah.
So if we had to go down a metaverse route, then I mean, take for example, right? Take the two games that Sony Studios were working on at the time I was at PlayStation. We were making PlayStation VR Worlds. That was a kind of one custom in-house engine, which was written to do sort of traditional polygon-based rendering, but really, really well. Fantastic lighting, volumetric fog, all that sort of stuff, and went down the kind of route of getting these really nice characters, using all the kind of the sort of nice modern shader tech. And then, the sister studio, Media Molecule, was working on Dreams, which used a completely different rendering technology.
Yeah.
Um, and it's not using polygons at all. And it's just, if you were to have those both in the same metaverse, it's like they don't even use the graphics card in the same way. It's
Yeah.
so, yeah. I just think you'd have to make it so generic that, well, I suppose that's why, you know, people look at the thing that Facebook put out, and it's like, yeah, you're kind of stuck in, you know, or like Roblox is like, you can make a game in Roblox, but it's going to kind of look like Roblox, and you can customize
Yeah.
the hell out of it, but you're still restricted to the restrictions of Roblox and the kind of technical bottlenecks of that particular engine and setup. And if your game requires some particular thing, you know, like you want to be writing Dwarf Fortress in Roblox, that thing's
Yeah.
just not going to run, you know. So
Oh.
it's it's I think there's too much customization and specific requirements in games, you know. You might be able to
It's
get anything that's written in Unreal to run in a Fortnite based metaverse, for example, or something, but
yeah.
again, still, like, people do so many engine mods for high end games that,
Yeah.
yeah, I think we're a way off that. And the
It
trouble is, as computers get better, expectations get better, so the goalposts move. So I can't
mm,
really see a point when the sort of, you're going to get high end graphics which are also interoperable and allow all these different types of gameplay. You know, your open worlds, your kind of, yeah, it's yeah, it sounds like a
feel
nightmare.
feels like they're waiting on a bit of a watershed moment, like a VCR Betamax sort of thing, maybe, where it's like, do you know what? It has to be in this. It has to be this sort of thing, and it almost
I
feels
think
like it's too far gone for something like that to happen.
well, the only way I can see it working at all is if everything was kind of cloud rendered and then streamed to your device, and then you're kind of less restricted in terms of the bottlenecks of your local hardware and kind of how that works. But you know, we're way off having internet that's high enough spec and ubiquitous enough that you could rely on that. You know, because otherwise
Yeah.
you're saying, okay, if you live in a city or certain parts of the country, then great, you can get involved. But if you don't, then sorry, you know, no games for you. Um,
Sure.
yeah, so away off
It's
that.
going to be a while until I can use my Dota 2 items to play iToy and wash windows with like a divine rapier or something. It's no good. It's not going to happen.
No.
Um, we have just a few minutes left. So if there are any
Okay.
last questions, please do get them in. While we're just waiting on those, I have just a
Hmm.
couple of closing questions, Sam, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Um, just a real general one, and again, we've already touched on it a wee bit. Sorry, I'm just finding my tab with my questions on it. There it is. Do you have any favorite pages or resources that you want everyone to know about? I know you've already mentioned a couple of bits and pieces, but just any closing thoughts on really good pages or resources that would be good for the folks to know about?
Oh, you know, I can't think of anything offhand. No, I
That's
can't. I
fine.
can't think.
That's fine. If you
Yeah,
do think of any, please do
I
feel
may
free to
post
pop them
something about it.
in the general chat, and those will come through. And one last question, which I'm asking everyone, which is just what are you playing at the moment? What do you have any time to play games at the moment, or is it
Yeah,
all
so
dev work?
yeah, I just actually spent the weekend having a LAN party playing Project Zomboid. So I do tend to play very different games to the games I make. So I like to play games which are kind of, yeah, games like Project Zomboid, or I play a bit of Path of Exile and Stardew Valley. Generally, games which are kind of multiplayer games where they're, you know, they don't require too much Twitch reaction and too much thought, where I can just chat to friends, catch up, and we'll just have a game going on. That's kind of the activity that we're doing, but we're sort of
Yeah.
talking a lot. I don't very often just sort of sit down and play a game on my own, because to be honest, if I'm opening up my computer, I just want to open up the engine and make stuff. So
That's fair enough. That's fair enough. That seems like that's going to be an important way to, like, because a lot of people obviously who go into making games, they do it because they love playing games. So it
yeah,
feels like you would need to have that separation between the type of stuff you make and the type of stuff you play in order
yeah,
to keep hold of that hobby.
you gotta love making games. You gotta love solving problems. Yeah, and you know, if you love playing games, then certainly there are roles which are more on the playing side. But even those, you know, if you love playing games, then playing the same level over and over and trying to break it, maybe that's not quite as satisfying. But if you're someone who's really into a particular genre and you absolutely play the hell out of that, then you're going to be really good at designing those. So, or potentially really good at designing those. So, yeah, I think it's a useful thing to be able to play games, but it's certainly, I found, not an absolute requirement. And quite a few people I've worked with, the programmers, they, I mean, certainly not most of them. I think most of them do play quite a lot of games, but I've worked with plenty of people who basically don't really play games at all. They just love solving the sorts of problems that video games, they love making them, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Couple of last questions that have just come in real quick. This one, I'm not sure if it needs a little bit more context, but maybe it will make more sense to you. What are the main bottlenecks in terms of computer hardware?
So if you're doing VR, it's definitely the GPU. You'll always be coming up against you're kind of trying to pre-bake all your lighting, use as few polys as possible to do things, minimize the amount of stuff that you're rendering. It's a little bit liberating in a way, because when I'm writing the actual game logic, doing stuff with physics and all that, I kind of don't need to worry too much, because I'm never able to do anything that complicated just because of the GPU bottlenecks. So the CPU, I kind of don't even bother really thinking about it unless I'm doing something particularly heavy. But if you're working on console, then you're instead of running at kind of 90 frames a second, you might only have to run at 30 frames a second, or I think it's probably usually 60 now. So it kind of depends on the format of the game. If we certain ones, like I remember the PS3 was like really good at certain things, but it had hardly any video memory. So basically, like different. I think most of them are like pretty much your two platforms now are basically like mobile phone or PC, and the games consoles are like PCs, and VR headsets are like mobile phones in terms of the sort of the power and the hardware structure and that. So yeah, it sort of depends on what you're making, but for VR, it's definitely the GPU.
Wicked. Awesome. And very last question before we wrap up. How far is your studio off for opening entry level roles, with a smile crying face, because everyone wants an entry level role at the moment, obviously?
Well, yeah. Well, if anyone knows someone who wants to give us the money to hire some people, then straight away. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we're a little way off that. We're probably going to have to get our first game out the door, and then we can look at that sort of thing. But yeah, definitely we'll be very noisy about that when the opportunity comes.
Good stuff. And when you are noisy about that, where can people find you on the social medias to hear about that?
They can find us at engage_software, I believe. Sorry, I've completely forgotten our Twitter handle.
It is.
Really
I'm
bad.
looking at it. Don't worry.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
at engage_software. And how about yourself, Sam? Do you want to plug your own
That's
socials?
that's at Scampleton. So,
Good stuff. Good stuff. Sam, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for answering the questions of the community
yeah,
and the
no
Fast
problem.
Trackers program. It's been a real pleasure speaking to you. Cheers.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody. Any questions, do feel free to get them in and we'll try and get them across to Sam. But otherwise, the recording of this will go out a wee bit later if you've only been able to catch the end part. Just leaves me to say thank you once again to Sam Gage from Engage Software. Thank you to my two colleagues, Jaden and Katie, who have been looking after the chat. And thank you everyone who came to listen. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.